All right. Test, people. All right, there we go. Yep. All right. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Good. Can people out in the Narthex lobby hear me?
No, probably not.
There's supposed to be a speaker out there. They may have just tuned me out. That's okay. Right. Well, thanks for being here tonight. We'll just kind of do a few words of introduction while we wait for people to make their way in with their food and drinks. There should be plenty of food and drinks out there, so as the night goes on, if you need to go back out and refill your plate or your cup, feel free to do so. The goal is to make that food and drink disappear so that we don't have to find homes for it in the church fridge. So feel free to eat up, drink up for all the stuff that is out there. Let's see, what else? If you need restrooms, again, those are all the way down the hall to your right. Tonight, starting at 7 o'clock, and actually they'll arrive a little earlier, we have a group of Narcotics Anonymous that meets in the lighthouse all the way at the far end of the building. So if you hear and see people in the building that you don't recognize, it's okay. They're supposed to be here. So just know that they're down there. They will be down there later tonight. In case you're heading down to the restrooms and you see people you don't recognize, they are supposed to be there. Tonight, my guess is that this will run a little over an hour after we get started. That's why we kind of said an hour and a half, give people time to get food and come in. We're going to go through, I think today I put together like 140 slides. So we're going to, and that was like me being very choosy with my photos even. So we'll get through quite a bit tonight. And if there are questions as we go, feel free to ask. I may not have all the answers, but I'll try to do my best. So yeah, this is, tonight we're going to take a look at a trip through the Holy Land. This March I got to go to a trip to the Holy Land. It was originally scheduled when I was on internship at Lord of Life Lutheran in Westchester, and then COVID hit. And everything got canceled. And so I really didn't expect that I would get to go because I had graduated and I was here now. And they said, well, you know what? Your name's already on the plane ticket and everything else. We can't change that. Why don't you go? So it was a real blessing. It was essentially no cost to our congregation for me to go because they had already prepaid for everything when I was on internship. So a great opportunity to go over there and tour the Holy Land. And so I'm really grateful to the people there who allowed me to continue on with that trip. So let's get going. Our trip was almost 6,000 miles of travel from the time we left Columbus, Ohio, stopped off in New York, and then flew from New York straight to Tel Aviv. And so a really, really long flight with really, really small seats. They do serve you some food on the flights, which is kind of nice, but for the most part, a pretty long trip. We arrived in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is kind of Israel's cultural and commercial capital. It's their city that never sleeps. It's known for its nightlife, its big, tall skyscrapers and things like that. It's very much what you would consider a large metropolitan U.S. city is Tel Aviv. Typically when we think of the Holy Land, we think of pictures kind of like this of the old city, but there are parts, that are very new, very current, and that was our experience in Tel Aviv. We didn't get to do a lot in Tel Aviv because COVID was still a concern. When we flew in, we had to take a test before we flew. We had a test once we landed in Tel Aviv. We had to quarantine in a hotel for 12 hours-ish, and then we could go on for the rest of our trip. So there's our crew there. We had about 30 travelers from Ohio, about 15 or so from Lord of Life in Westchester, and about 15 from Advent Lutheran Church in Upper Arlington. Their pastor is Pastor Aaron Lane, and he was on the trip with us as well. We met up with a group of about 10 to 15 from a church in Virginia, a Lutheran church as well, that met us there. So big group of us. What's nice about having a larger group like that is you get one of the really nice, comfy, air-conditioned tour buses with the nice, comfy seats. So we were able to get that. Our first night, we stayed at a hotel. Like I said, we had a quarantine. We were at a hotel that was right on the Mediterranean Sea. So that's from my balcony right there at night when we got there, being able to see the Mediterranean. And then when we were released from quarantine, we were able to actually go walk on the beach in the morning. Just like we have out there, food is abundant in all of the parts of the trip. Your breakfast and dinners are always paid for as part of your cost, and lunches we typically did out with some street food. But, there was always a bounty of food, a lot of food that was very fresh, a lot of vegetables, a lot of grains, a lot of dips and spices and salads. A lot of times you would go up to a table, not unlike this one on the left here, and there would be a whole bunch of bowls of things, and you wouldn't know what it was. There was nothing telling you what it was. You just put it on your plate and kept trying food until you figured out what you liked. It was very different from American cuisine. There was a guy on our trip who pretty much his entire life ate eggs and bacon for breakfast, and you're not getting eggs and bacon. You're not getting bacon, period, when you're in the Holy Land, because most of our hotels were kosher, meaning they didn't have any pork products whatsoever. So there were meals where you definitely weren't getting any meat whatsoever in order for them to keep kosher. But lots of great food options, lots of fresh food, and you can tell they really put a large spread out at every meal. Our first day of travel, the first place we went to was Caesarea. Now, Caesarea is the political seat of Pontius Pilate. So when we talk about Pontius Pilate being kind of a governor of an area, he was actually the governor of Caesarea, which is not in or near Jerusalem. But what happened was he was kind of stationed here, but kind of oversaw the whole area. So when all of the commotion started to come about with Jesus coming into Jerusalem, they called for him, and he came down to Jerusalem to be able to mitigate what was going on there. This first thing that you see here is a theater. You can see the seats. It's an amphitheater built from that time period. It would have been in that period of Herod the Great, who was there probably in the 70 BCE, so before Christ, before the Common Era, as they say. So that would have been something that he built. He was given that seat of a place to build his empire, and so Herod the Great built a lot here. So you'll see here's the theater here, and here's it coming from the other direction. The really cool thing is they've done a lot of stabilization on it, and they still use it from time to time. They stage productions there, and you can actually sit on all of the stone seats. And then right next to that was Herod's palace and estates. And so this is kind of just a little representation. It's hard to see. I'll have a link to this presentation available so people can look at it later on their computer or phone or whatever if you'd like. But you'll see that Herod was known for building a lot of things, and when it came to his home, he also built quite a bit as well. So here's the Mediterranean, and you'll notice this little kind of squared out structure right here. That was Herod's pool. Herod built himself a pool, private bathing pool area, and so that was hewn into the rock there right on the ocean. So kind of the first person, I think, to maybe do like an infinity type of pool situation in BCE. Here are some old mosaic floors that have been uncovered from what would have been kind of a bathing area there. And then you'll see just some of the interesting architecture that they had. Right in that same area, next to his palace, there was a hippodrome. A hippodrome is actually for chariot racing. And so you can kind of see, now this isn't, this right here is not original structure right here, but what they did was they knew the hippodrome was there, and so they kind of rebuilt this little thing here so you could kind of see where the path of the chariots would have been going around in that time. These are old Roman toilets. This is me doing my best impersonation from the movie Dumb and Dumber. So these are toilets. What would happen is you would kind of sit and straddle these two things, right there next to everyone with you. and use the restroom. And then there was water that flowed and just carried everything down that little channel there. So, if you're a little shy using the restroom when someone's in the stall next to you, imagine in the middle of a hippodrome race, just having to hike up your toga and go right there in front of everyone. This is a remnant of a miles-long Roman aqueduct. It's not actually functioning, but the original structure is still there. That's how well the Romans built things during their time. So it's still there, miles long. You can see that water delivery system. Later on that day, we went off to Haifa. Haifa is a port city on the Mediterranean. It is home to, they believe, Elijah, the prophet, kind of was from that area. And then these are now the Haifa Gardens. It's I think it's a World Heritage site now, but some very beautiful gardens that are there in Haifa, there at the port city. And while we were there at Haifa, we stopped at the Stella Monastery. This is, as we start to go on here, you're going to see a lot of pictures of churches and basilicas and things like that. Throughout time in history, people wanted to mark the place where they thought special things happened in the life of the church. And so they would build a church over that spot. Oftentimes then, when Jerusalem or other places would be ransacked, then they would just have to build it again and again and again. There is not a single location in all of Israel that everyone agrees on that this thing happened here. We know that for a fact. Everything is kind of up in the air. There are some that are a little bit more widely accepted, and I'll tell you when we get to those. But some of these, is this, we'll get to a picture here in a second of Elijah's cave. Is this the cave that Elijah ran off to and hid when he was being attacked by Jezebel? No one really knows. But you have to remember, this is an oral tradition. So, they would tell these stories of significant things in the life of the Hebrew and Jewish people. And so, there is probably for a good nugget of truth in there, and it probably was in that region. This particular cave, who knows? And so that's the way it is with a lot of these things. But this is Stella Monastery. The doors on just about every place you go into have really intricate sculpture or carvings of, who that church is kind of built for, right? And so this is for Elijah, and it's run by the Carmelite monks. So this is the floor you come in on, and then you go down underground, because you can actually see here's part of the floor right here. This is where they uncovered an original cave. And so we'll get a closer picture here. So this is the cave right here. The cave would not have been much bigger than from here to here. So we talk about people running off and living in caves. It's not like a big vast network of caves that they had to live in. It was essentially just a small little area of rock that was carved out where they were at. And so there's a little altar down here where people can come and pray to the prophet Elijah, or just, go and be reverent there if they would like. The cool thing about a lot of these sites, especially the ones that are pre-Jesus, is that, they're all three Abrahamic faiths go to these sites because these people all have meaning to them. And so what I mean by Abrahamic faith is obviously Abraham was the father of the Hebrew Jewish people. And so all of them, all of the Jewish people, Hebrew people, go here to see Elijah. The Muslim faith, which it branched off from Abraham's son Ishmael, they also see Elijah as a prophet, and so they'll come, and then also, obviously, Christianity, Christians will come. So a lot of these places will have all three faiths that will go and give reverence. So that was Stella Monastery. Next we went to Tel Megiddo. And Tel Megiddo is now a national park, but it is a site where archaeologists have found remains of cities for more than 20 distinct historical periods. So not just like they built a city, they tore it down, and then 3 years later they built a city and they count that as two. No, they're talking like 20 different periods in history, 20 different layers as they've dug down that they've said this was a civilization, this was a civilization that was here, this is one that was here, this is one that was here. And it's amazing to think about, 20 different civilizations that all lived on this same part of land, in a country where we're hundreds of years old. We're talking someone inhabiting this place for thousands of years. And tens of thousands of years. I mean, the fact that when they would dig down, you'll see pictures of this later, they would dig down, and then you have all the rubble of a city. It would be like if Lebanon was razed all the way to the ground, and then time went by, and then someone came and built right on top of that rubble, and then that place got tore down, and someone built on top of that. I mean, it just is absolutely amazing. These right here are city gates. Oftentimes you'll hear in the Bible them talk about city gates. These are different than the gates of Jerusalem, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But the city gates, were places where they would have it walled off, and if you wanted to get in, you had to go through the gate. You'll notice here that there are actually 3 sets of these gates. So, it wasn't like it was as peaceful of a time there as it is in most of our life in this country. So there would be multiple gates. So if you broke through the first gate, there was a second gate. If you broke through the second gate, there was a third. And then they could also bring you into one gate, section you off, and kind of interrogate you if they wanted to figure out if you should be there. But this is up on a hill here. You'll notice that you can look out over the land. What's really cool is you'll notice that there are slides that have very green, lush areas, and then some that are very barren and dry, the Negev desert. And so this was the reason this place in particular was important was it was in the middle of the trade route from Egypt to Syria and to Mesopotamia. So if you wanted to cart things across the Middle East, you had to go through here, which means you paid tax here. And so what they built up on a hill so that they could use the fertile ground below for agriculture, but then also be able to see people coming from miles away, head them off, and make them pay their tribute and tax. It's hard to see right here, but this is actually a giant circle of rock right here, built up. I would say it's probably 1.5 times our altar and then round. That is the remains of a Canaanite altar. And so when you hear about in the Bible that they built altars and sacrificed things upon them, it wasn't a nice, neat little table like we're used to for an altar. It was something like this, just a mound of stone that they would put together. This is a grain silo. It would have been something that everyone in the city kind of contributed to. It was a society where everyone kind of helped one another in a lot of ways. And so everyone would dump their grain into here and then use it as needed. This is from, they can date this grain silo back to King Jeroboam from the Old Testament. And so that is about 8th century BC. So when I say BC or BCE, it means before Common Era, which used to be BC, like before Christ, and then CE or AD would be later on. So a very old grain silo here. They had stables there, so they put these little wire horses here for you to get an idea of what it looked like. But they had, these are mangers. So that's what they would feed the horses in. So I'm sorry that I'm ruining everyone's Christmas scene. But when we have the nice little wooden thing that's in our creche, it's likely that's not what they put Jesus in. It's likely that they put him in something along the lines of this, that they would put feed in and water. So those are mangers. Now, they needed a water source, so what did they do? They dug down. They dug down 80 meters below the bedrock in order to get to the water cistern. And so you can see here, we're going down, 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 down from on top of the hill. And then once we get down into here, it starts a system through the bedrock and down below into the cistern there. And so it's absolutely amazing to me to think of architectural wonders now, but then to think about this thousands of years ago. What were they using? They didn't have the same heavy machinery and dynamite and everything that we had to blast down and get to this stuff. I mean, it was a lot of hard work and absolutely amazing. Still, that same day, we did a lot on our first day. We went to the town of Nazareth. And first place that we went to was the Basilica of the Annunciation. Now, also what you're going to notice is that the sizes of these cathedrals and these things over time start to get a lot smaller. This one really big. When we get to the Church of the Ascension, it's not much bigger than our sacristy back here, this little closet. And the reason was, as the Crusaders were going through and building these churches on these sites, they had a lot of money in the beginning, and they started building at the beginning of Jesus' life, meaning when Mary was told that she was having the Son of God. And so, hey, this is the first thing on our to-do list of things to build. We're going gung-ho, and they built this really big, beautiful basilica, and then as they got on, they were running out of time for the Crusades as the Muslim people were fighting back, and so they started skimping as they went along, as funds also deteriorated. But here in this Basilica of the Annunciation, it's believed to be built over the home of Mary. Again, no one really knows if that was Mary's exact home or not that she grew up in, but they believe that it was built there because that is where the angel came to see her. And here you will see murals of Mary and Jesus from countries all over the world. Countries make their own murals and send them there for them to be displayed. And what's really cool is that it's using all different kinds of mediums. And then most of the time, if you'll notice here, like in Korea, you'll have Mary and Joseph depicted as Korean. And so in all of these different murals, typically they envision Mary and Jesus in their culture. Which is a really cool thing to see that diversity. And also just as they begin to say, Jesus was for all people, doesn't matter what your skin color was or where you were from. And so there's lots of those there. So that's an inside part of the church there. This one on the left here, this is the mural from the United States. And so it's a really cool, it's hard to tell, but this is like 3D coming out of the wall. And some really cool color and geometric shapes and things like that. Here, this little bit right here, this is a couple of levels down underground where they uncovered the bits of this little archway here, and then that's where they believe it may have been part of Mary's home. And in a lot of these, you'll notice, like here we have some stuff here. This may have been original, and then they went through and did some repair work to kind of make it stable enough. So they tried to leave things untouched as much as possible when they could. And then just outside the gates of Nazareth is the Church of St. Joseph. This is where they believe Joseph's workshop was. When you go in there, this is a mikvah. This is a ceremonial bath. And so you would step down into there and bathe. You would do that before you went off to temple, or if you were ever considered unclean for some reason, you would use those mikvahs, those ceremonial baths. There's a little bit of controversy in the Middle East about Joseph and whether he was a carpenter or a mason. There's historical things, documentation from that period that talk about the sons of Joseph and the family of Joseph as masons. Their hands were rough from masonry work. So it's an interesting thing there that, again, a lot of stuff is kind of up for debate of when things happened. So that night, we traveled to the Sea of Galilee, and we stayed in a place there. So this was right outside of our hotel. You could walk out on the dock out to see the Sea of Galilee. Here, right outside our door, the doors outside of every hotel room that we stayed in had one of these. These are mezuzahs, and what they do is they roll up bits of scripture and tuck those in there, specifically the Shema and oftentimes the Ten Commandments and other things that are important to them, because the Jewish people have some traditions of, that you bind the Word of God to the doorposts of your home, to your head, your heart, your hands, and so these mezuzahs are all over the place. This is our boat that we went out on. We went out on the Sea of Galilee on this boat here. This would not have been a boat that Jesus went out on. This is a little more modern. They have uncovered a boat from that time period, and it's in a museum there now. We were not able to go in and see that at that time, but there's some really neat stuff out now about that boat. And as you're on the boat and going out over the Sea of Galilee, you get a great idea of what that would have been like. It's 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, basically 33 miles circumference all the way around it. And so when you're out there, you can't necessarily see to the other side at times, but as you're traveling, you will begin to see all the hills and things that are there. And so when they were traveling around, what we have to remember is they didn't have the same roads that we're driving on, right? They were traversing these hilly regions as they went around. While we were out there, here's again just some pictures from out on the boat. While we were out there on the water, every time we went someplace, we tried to read a little bit of scripture that pertains to that place. And so obviously here they stopped the boat and they got it real calm, and we read the story of Jesus calming the sea, and then also of Peter walking on water. And so it was a really cool experience to read those and be there floating on the Sea of Galilee. It is the main source of fresh water in the area. And it's actually the second lowest lake in, they call it the Sea of Galilee, really it's a lake. It's the second lowest lake in the world, actually. It's actually several hundred feet below sea level. Then we went off to Church of the Primacy of St. Peter. Everyone knows what that means, right? I didn't know half the names of these things that we went to until they explained them to us. The Primacy of St. Peter is essentially the place where Jesus tells Peter, "Upon you I will build my church. You are the rock upon which I will build my church." And so the church that's built there is quite literally built around a rock. Little on the nose there, right? And so, again, this is not very big. There's not much back behind here, but this is the rock that they believe that conversation happened. And so they built a church around it. And then right outside of that church is, you can just walk right on out into the sea. And so, it was thought that as they were going around and visiting places, you could see that it's actually pretty easy to pull your boat right up onto the shore. There wasn't the need for major docks and things like we would think of needing them when we go into port. Next, we headed to Capernaum, and Capernaum is really kind of the home of Peter. It was also kind of the home of Jesus when he was growing up. So when we hear about young Jesus going to the synagogue to read and teach and all that kind of stuff, it would have happened in Capernaum. This is called the White Synagogue. It was actually built about 100 years after Jesus' life, but in the same place where Jesus, it was built on top of another synagogue that was there previously. So it's believed that the synagogue that's below it is the synagogue that Jesus would have gone to and prayed at. So here are some remnants of the synagogue. Down here you'll see this is all kind of newer stone that they've used just to kind of flesh it out, but all of this that's here is original. Now, oftentimes when they uncover this stuff, these columns aren't standing, and some of this wall is knocked over, and so they'll take what was there in the immediate area and rebuild it the way it would have been, and set the pillars back upright and some of those kinds of things. But they're not shipping in pieces and parts from all over the Middle East to rebuild things. They're using what's currently there. This is really cool. You'll see some little designs etched into the stone floor of the synagogue. These are games that children would play during synagogue time. So, if you're worried about kids getting crayons on the pews, imagine if they scratched games into the floor of the church and would play there. So these are actual little games that they would play there on the floor of the synagogue. You'll see the synagogue in the background here. All of these structures out here would have been homes. So these are all homes, again, not very big. These would have all been homes in that time period where in a small town like this, if you had your home closer to the synagogue, you were wealthier. To live in proximity to the house of God or where you would go to worship God meant that you had a little bit more money. And so all of these people would build kind of homes in and around. Below, you'll see that this is part of the ground up here, and then there's stuff below, a couple different layers. And again, they found some foundations here, and again, they believe that is where Peter's home would have been. And they believe that that is kind of the first, quote-unquote, Christian church in the world. Meaning that, when Christ leaves, Peter probably went back home for a little while to regroup and probably started teaching from his home, first kind of house church thing there. And then everywhere we went, it was so cool to see different interpretations of altars. And so here in that church, here's the altar at the Primacy of Peter Church with the mural and mosaic on the front of it. Next, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes, a very beautiful kind of mountainside that they have with all kinds of beautiful flowers and things. Those of you who have worked with me out in the garden know that I don't know one flower from the next, so I just took some general pictures of flowers. You might be able to tell what's good, or I may have missed something that was amazing. But very beautiful. Here they had these little plaques that were made, and they had the Beatitudes in multiple languages as you went around. You could read the Beatitudes in your language. Here, and again, they had a little station for each one. Blessed are they, who are mourn, for they will be comforted. And then they also had just some really cool landscaping and things. At the base of we'll talk about this in a minute, at the base of the Mount of Beatitudes is where they believe that Jesus did the miracle of loaves and fishes. And so here's just a little landscaping to represent the fish and the loaves right here. This is the church that is built there. And so this is, did I put these in wrong order? No. So on the Mount of Beatitudes, there was a church. We didn't go in it. Or no, we did go in it, but this is not it. I forgot to put that picture in. But the other cool thing that we learned that you don't necessarily know unless you have a professional guide with you is that church is built with 8 walls. It's an octagon. Why is that significant? There are 8 Beatitudes. So they built a wall for each of the Beatitudes. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you get when you go and learn about some of the the reasoning behind some of the things that are built here. So this is actually, they believe right here, this little piece of rock underneath this altar is where the miracle of the loaves and fishes happened. So that's why that's built there. I just took a picture of this because it's really cool. This is like thinly sliced marble that they used for windows. So pretty incredible. In the church there, here's a mosaic floor. And you can't really see it through here, right? But this is where they started to dig down and excavate. And then there's another mosaic right there. So, I mean, again, as we talk about, there's layers of things. It's like the mosaic floor is there. Stuff falls down. They build on top of it, put a new mosaic floor down, and it's just absolutely amazing. And you can see the detail, some of extremely beautiful mosaic work. This is an olive oil press. And so what they would do is they would put all of the olives in here, and then they would roll the stone around to press it, and then there were grooves where the olive oil would flow out. And so you would see these a lot of places. There's also a Bible verse about... actually, it's for this Sunday, but they cut part of that reading out. There's a part in the reading that we don't get in Luke this week where Jesus says, "Woe unto you, it would be better for you to have a millstone around your neck and thrown into the ocean than to cause one of my children to stumble." And so, these... it's hard to see right here, but that would have been a millstone. They would have put that around your neck and thrown you into the water. And another cool thing, and I took pictures of a lot of these as we went. One, because every place you would go, they'd have a sign. This is why you're here. Here's all the things that Jesus did here. Here are all the churches that have been built in this area. And so even if you feel overwhelmed when you're there, snap a couple pictures of those signs, and when you go back later, you can really read them and have time to read them because you didn't have time really to read everything. And then it also just helps you as you're going through your pictures, remember, oh, this is where I'm at right now. Because, you'll have a lot of pictures. So then we stopped and ate lunch because we were in Capernaum and a fisherman's city. We ate it's called St. Peter's fish is what they call it. And it is essentially just a fish that they fry and hand to you. And so you get to pull it apart and eat it and pull the scales out of your mouth, and the fish is looking at you with its eye, and there were several people that didn't eat that day. I had no problem with it. But when you think about the story of the loaves and the fishes and things like that, it wasn't like they had a fish and they neatly filleted it up and put a nice lemon beurre blanc with it or something. No, this is what you get. Here's a fish, rip a piece off and hand it to the next person, right? So that's what it would have been. And then as we're traveling to our next place, again, just some of the awesome greenery that is still present there. Next, we headed to the city of Cana. Anyone know what Cana is famous for? The wedding at Cana. So the Holy Land has all of these amazing ancient sites, and then right next to it, the most overly commercialized crap you've ever seen in your life. Here's the Cana wedding wine store, where you can buy authentic Cana wine. And it is worse than the Aldi wine that you had tonight. So when they say the best Cana wine, it is not. It is really terrible wine. The guides will even tell you, this is a tourist trap. Don't buy wine here. There's so many better places to buy wine. It's not like they're using a variety of grape that they've had there forever that, whatever. No. Here you can stay at the Cana wedding guest house and all kinds of things. But we did go to a church built there over the site of where they believe that wedding took place and that Jesus turned the water into wine. So this was one of the vats. Again, was this one of the actual vats? No one knows, but it is a vat that would have been used at that time to hold 20 or 30 gallons of water for washing, for ritual washing. So Jesus would have turned all of the water that were in those 20 to 30 gallon vats into wine. And so these are on display there. While we were there, and again, this is kind of underground, there were several couples there who did a renewing of their vows there at that chapel in and amongst that place. So the really cool thing is if you work with a tour company and you grease their palms a little bit, they will talk to people that they know, and like normally there's just people constantly flowing through here. But our tour guide had been doing this for his entire life, and he knew everyone. I mean, he walked into a place and they all just said, "Hey, Johnny," and so he was able to just say, "Hey, we need you to shut the door behind us for 15 minutes. Don't let anyone else in." And they would do that in some of the places we were at. Then we went to the Jordan River, or as I call it, the Jordan Creek, because that's how wide it is right there. I mean, it's like a few steps across. That's all it is. And it is that color. I mean, it is brown water. It's not very deep. It's small. And some people in our group took a little vial of like a pill vial and filled it up with water and brought it back, and it was amazing. By the time they had it back, the water was a little clear on top and then a whole bunch of sediment down at the bottom. But this is a site that, on the Jordan River where very much Jesus would have been and gone. It's been baptized by John. So right over here, Palestine. Right over here, Jordan. Yeah. So, that's all that separates those two countries right there, is that. That and on either side behind here that you don't see, a whole bunch of military. But, here it is, another view of it here. Here's someone who is getting baptized, coming out of the water. And while we were there, we had the opportunity to do an affirmation of baptism with everyone. So we did a remembrance of baptism with all the people that were on the trip, able to actually, if they wanted to, take their shoes off, step into a part kind of that's there, and then, dip the water out of the Jordan for each person as they remember their baptism. I talked about military. When we went to that site, that was in the West Bank. And so oftentimes we would have to travel through military checkpoints. It's really easy to get into the West Bank because they are extremely poor and oppressed, and so they'll let anyone in because, hey, come spend your money. But to get back into Israel is a major ordeal. You have to have all kinds of paperwork. Luckily, Israel makes a boatload of their money on tourism, and so if you're on a giant tour bus, it's pretty easy to get back and forth. So this is from our tour bus. It's being stopped by the military. They went out and they were checking cars, but they would also check registries of your trip and all that kind of stuff. And then just, everywhere you went, there were people, heavily armed people everywhere. At first, it's a little concerning, especially when you get off the plane and there's all these people, and then you're like, okay, I get it, it's an airport. And then you walk outside and there's tons more people. They're everywhere. But I never once felt unsafe at any point while I was there. We got to walk by the gates of the old city of Jerusalem. And so oftentimes they'll talk in the Bible about so-and-so went in through this gate or out through this gate. They were named. So this particular gate here is the Lion Gate. Well, why do they call it the Lion Gate? Here in the stone, you'll see little lions that mark the gate. And so that's how some of them got their names, based on, how they were marked. We also then went to St. Anne's Church. Yep, this is all on our third day. Went to St. Anne's Church. St. Anne was the mother of Mary, and so this was a church built in her honor. And this is actually also the starting point for the Via Dolorosa, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the way of the suffering or the passion of the Christ as you walk through those different stations of the cross. While we were there, again, this is one of those places where you can see layers and layers of civilization that they've been uncovering, digging down. Here's a great shot of, just as they have continued to dig, how many layers of things that they have come across. This is also a site where they believe Jesus told the man who had been ill for 38 years, rise, take up your mat, and walk. And so oftentimes there are these plaques around places that will tell you what they believe happened there. So the next day, we went out, and we, for the most part, Western culture hasn't really invaded Old Jerusalem and some of these old sites. This McDonald's was pretty much the only Western sign of Western civilization that we kind of saw in there. And as prevalent as Starbucks seems to be, they have kept Starbucks out of Israel. And so people start things called Stars and Bucks Cafe to try to trick the Westerners who come and need a cup of coffee. Hey, they'll pay extra at the Stars and Bucks Cafe. So some fun stuff you'll see there. This is the Church of the Nativity, and so this is where they believe Jesus was born. Roman Catholics, not Roman Catholics, Greek Orthodox have a presence in a lot of these places, and so anytime you see some of this really ornate, almost gaudy work of metal, it's usually altars and things done by the Greek Orthodox Church. This is the entrance to the church, this little doorway that people are having to bend over to get through. Why? Were people 3 feet shorter than they are now? No. There are a couple of reasons for this. You'll get 2 different stories depending on who you ask. One person will say, after the church was destroyed and rebuilt, they built it like this so that everyone would have to bow as they enter the church to show reverence to the place where Christ was born. Other people will tell you, people were tired of marauders coming in and tearing down their church. And so they built a low doorway so that if you were going to attack the church and try to get inside and hurt people, you had to enter the church with your head down, and they could lop it right off. Both, are pretty valid reasons for putting the door like that. But again, this is a multi-layer church. Churches built on top of churches on top of churches. You get down, all the way till you get to this point where there's an altar similar in size to this, maybe a little smaller. And then you crawl under the altar, and you see this little star right here, and there's a little piece of glass in the middle. And you look down through that glass, and they believe that's the spot where Jesus was laid in the manger. And so, you see people crawl under there, this was in the midst of COVID, and yet people are kissing all over that thing. And the next person gets down and is kissing all over it. But yeah, there's a lot of reverence to be had. The Bethlehem Star, I had a note about that. Bethlehem Star, 14 points on the star of Bethlehem, and that is to signify the 14 generations from Abraham to Jesus. And so that's the significance of the number of points on the star. And so here's a mural of that Basilica of the Nativity. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So a lot of great stuff there. After we left there, we went to, still in the city of Nazareth. No, not Nazareth. Where am I at? Bethlehem. Here we go. This is the Shepherd's Field. It's kind of outside of Bethlehem. 2 things of significance here. The first one, this is also right as we were there, right as fighting in Ukraine had really ramped up. And so here we are stepping into this site, and someone had left a Ukrainian flag and a little baby there on this altar and a sign to pray for the Ukraine. But this is known as Shepherd's Field. This was a cave here. So again, you'll kind of get an idea of when the shepherds were in the caves. This is kind of what it looked like. It's not very tall, just enough to stand up in there. Significance of this site would be twofold. One, the They believe this is where Ruth and Boaz lived. So the whole book of Ruth, when she comes back and is with Boaz and they are tending the fields, that this would have been there. That's the Old Testament reference. The New Testament reference, this is where they believe that the angel appeared to the shepherds in the field. And then they traveled to Bethlehem to see the baby. So they believe that this was in this field. This was they can date this back a long time of, this would be an area that shepherds would have had flocks. Then we went on. Let's see. So this is the church that's built there at the site of Shepherd's Field. It's hard to see right here, but that's an angel actually pointing there. And then you'll see the mosaic work as you come in there, Gloria in Excelsis Deo, that we sing. And then here's some pictures of the fields from that vantage point that would have been all around. That was the end of that day. Then on the 20th, that was the 20th, the 21st, our first stop was at Masada. If you're unfamiliar with Masada, it's a really interesting story. A group of Jewish people went off to live at this place far away, off in the desert, because they didn't want the invading armies to take them over and kill them and enslave them, so they went to this far-off place. And then, unfortunately, as time goes on, they're found and slaughtered. Actually, they were not slaughtered. There's a story there that as their walls are being breached, they gathered everyone in the city together, and they said, we have a choice. We can be carried off into exile and slavery again, or we can all take our lives here. And so everyone at Masada killed themselves rather than be taken off into exile and slavery again. But this is how high up on a hill it is. You actually have to take a cable car up to the top of it. There is a switchback path, but it takes you most of the day to get up to the top. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to spend our day in various ways. So way up high on top of this mountain. This would have been one of the gates into that city that was there. Again, mosaic floors that you see, writing, Hebrew writing scratched into the walls. So it's hard to tell, but this is one of the walls of the city that's on the edge. This is a cliff right outside this little door. And then, giant caverns over to where more hillsides would have been. These little rocks right here, they're not so little. They're actually kind of boulder sized, but you'll notice they're all very similar in shape. Those would have been essentially like cannonballs. Not that they had a cannon, but what they would have done is taken those and thrown those off of the side of the cliff over the walls as people were trying to build up their ramps to get up to the city. This is a columbarium right here. So as people died, they would take their bones and they would store them. And so all these little nooks and crannies are where they would have stored the bones of their ancestors that died. This is the remnants of there on site was a small synagogue. And again, this is not, obviously, this is new. But this is to show you what would have been there. There is part of the original pillar that's there that they've coated around. But this would have been just a small little synagogue that they would have had for themselves at that place. Still to this day, in a little enclosed, temperature-controlled area, they have rabbis who copy scripture 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And again, it's a trek. So they have to get on that cable car and do their shift, and then they go home, the next person's there, and it's a constant thing there where people are there. It's in honor of those people who died and took their lives there. They see this by copying scripture there in their place, because that's what these people were doing there. They left to try to preserve their faith, and so they would have been copying scrolls and everything else, and so they do that to this day in memory of them. So this was a town in and of itself, so they needed to do everything there, including bathe. So they had a bathhouse. And you can see the 2 floors here. This is actually not like a full floor, but like maybe a 2.5-foot section there. And then there would have been a floor here. So they would have brought water in, and there would have been water there, and then fires underneath to heat up that water. And so it was also really cool. I don't have pictures of this because it's hard to make it out. But they dug cisterns into that whole cliffside. So what they would do is they would dig channels from like the top of the cliff down, dig a big vat, and so water would run down those channels and fill up these cisterns, and then they would dip water out and as they need it. Josephus Flavius is a historian that lived in and around the time of Jesus. And so there's a lot of things that he writes. He was a historian predominantly for Rome and for Jewish people. And so his writings are some of the oldest and well-known and respected writings to validate things that happened during that time, because he was a funded historian, and this is what he did. He wrote and wrote and wrote history. And so there are often a lot of times where you can read writings of around places from Josephus, and this is one here about Masada. He wrote about Masada, what happened, and there's a little statue there dedicated to him. There's actually a little museum all about him there at Masada as well. Then we traveled off to Qumran. Qumran was a settlement of Essene people. They, best way to put it is they were kind of like a commune of people. Like they wanted to go and live kind of in and amongst themselves. Their views were a little bit different from the Jewish people, not by much. But when they were there in the caves of Qumran, here are the sites where some of those Dead Sea Scrolls were found. These are not the actual Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a replica of what it would have looked like using some of those pieces. When they found them, it was essentially, this was in the 40s, that some guy, like shepherd boy, lost a sheep and was like throwing rocks in a cave to try to find the sheep, and heard something break and went down in there and found these clay pots full of writings that these people did, and those are the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so people eventually came in and bought them up and that kind of thing. There's also another legend that the guy who originally found them didn't know their value and was actually using them to feed his fires, these old scrolls, until someone came along and was like, those are really important, I want to buy all those off you. So that's Qumran, and it's really cool. More of a lot of the same that you saw in Masada, of the different like structures of houses and stuff, so I didn't feel like I needed to show it to you all again. Then we headed to the Dead Sea. Here's somebody floating in the Dead Sea. I did not float in the Dead Sea. I don't know, I just didn't feel like it. But they say it's a really cool experience. They say it's hard to describe. Once you're actually floating, they say it's really hard to actually get back out. Because like you have to try to push yourself back down into the water because there's such a high salt content in the water. Now, actually, the Dead Sea is at its like lowest point in history because they keep siphoning water off of the Jordan, which flows into it, and they're siphoning that water off into different countries and other places, and so it's at its lowest it's been in a long time. So where we're at right here, it looks, not like a beach. Well, there's a reason, because like 100 feet up here is a beach. So like they built a beach with like, places to hang out and like showers and all this kind of stuff. And then as it continues to recede, well, now the beach is way up here and the water's way down here. So you had to go down and you could see the salt deposits as it dries and things like that. So that is the lowest place on earth, the Dead Sea. Also home to the lowest bar in the world. Again, like I said, anything for a little bit of commercial gain there. So several of us had a Middle Eastern beer at the lowest bar in the world. And then, again, here comes our U.S. influence You can now do glamping at the Dead Sea. For those of you who don't know what glamping is, it's high-end camping. So, it's essentially like a tent with, Marriott accommodations inside. And so you can, while you're at the Dead Sea, do some glamping as well. We traveled then off to, that was the end of our day. Went back and showered up and had dinner. And next day we went off to the Mount of Olives. I'll make sure I'm doing good on time here. That doesn't work. Okay. Move kind of quickly through these last couple parts here. So this is Mount of Olives. This is the Church of the Ascension. So last thing that Jesus did on earth, right? Ascended to heaven. And so the Crusaders get there and they're like, okay, this is all we got time and money for. So it's this building right here. This is the Church of the Ascension. This is the inside of the church. And that's it. So, if you feel one of our classrooms in the back is in bad disrepair, take a look at the Church of the Ascension in the Holy Land, right? This right here is believed, again, who knows, to be like there's believed to be a footprint in the rock that, like, when Jesus ascended, like, it was like so much force to go up that, like, his foot imprinted into the rock. There. Now, this church is not big enough for altars inside, per se. And again, all of these sites are holy to several different people, and then also several different Christian sects. So, like, the Roman Catholic Church would want to have an altar, but the Eastern Orthodox are not going to share the same altar as them, and the Coptic Church is not going to share the same altar as them. So when you went around to the back of the building, outside, everyone had their own little altar. So this is the Greek Orthodox altar right here, and then there were several more that were just built all over the place, because no one can share. So they had all these, and again, they were built outside because there was no room inside. This little guy followed us around quite a bit this last day. So he was trying to sell us different things, olive branches and different things throughout the day, and we would show up someplace and he'd be there to sell something, and then he would disappear, and then, like, we would travel someplace else, and all of a sudden he was there selling something else. But you'll notice he's short in stature. Can you guess what his name was? Zacchaeus. Yeah. Was that his real name? I don't know. He told us his name was Zacchaeus. I think he just did that because he knew he was short and he thought it might get some sympathy purchases. So that's Zacchaeus. He followed us around to sell us stuff. This is the Church of Pater Noster, which is Our Father. This is the place that they believe that one of the first places that Jesus taught the prayer, the Our Father prayer, to the disciples. The cool thing is that, again, in languages from all over the world, they have murals of the Our Father in different languages. So you can go through, and I think it's 165 different languages, so you can go through and really locate the Lord's Prayer in your native language. So while we were there, we did some other kind of touristy things. This is Dome of the Rock. It's a pretty, oftentimes when you see pictures of the Holy Land, like, this is one of the things that is most noticeable and recognizable. It's actually a Muslim temple, but that's what people recognize that. So with the gold top. But yeah, here we are standing up here, and again, you can just see kind of the sprawl of things and just the layers as things have gone on. Now, all of these right along here, you'll see these different layers. Those are all Jewish cemeteries. And so these are essentially like a sarcophagus above ground. And so they're just there, just all over the place. They're just placed right next to one another. And you'll notice they don't leave flowers, because flowers are temporal and temporary, and they fade and they die. And that is... it's not representative of their love and memory for their loved one. And so they leave, you'll notice, rocks on on the sarcophagi. They'll leave little rocks there. So when they go to pray, they'll lay a rock there because a rock is permanent. So while we were there, some people chose to ride on some camels and some other, fun touristy things. Next, we went to Church of St. Peter in Galakantu. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, I didn't either. But this is, once we got inside, this is the altar, and this is actually on the altar right here. If you can't tell what that is, that's a rooster. And so this is the site that they believed that Peter denied Christ 3 times. And so, I don't know why you would build a church on the guy who denies Christ 3 times, but that's okay. That's where that was. This is the Church of Dominus Flevit, which means Jesus wept. And so this is the spot where you'll notice through here, you can start to see Jerusalem. And so there's the story where Jesus first beheld the city off in the distance, and he wept for the city. And so this is where they believe that Jesus wept. And the church that's built there actually has this teardrop kind of ceiling. And so the architecture, again, is representative of what actually they believe happened there. Next, we went to Garden of Gethsemane. Again, we're talking about the doors as you go into place. Like here is this beautiful entrance with a tree of life and all of these things here. Again, beautiful stained glass and things as you go through. Here is, this is the spot where they believe, at the Garden of Gethsemane is the Basilica of Agony, which is also inside the Church of All Nations. So this is where they believe that Jesus went off to pray by himself and ask that the cup be taken away. And so they believe this is the rock spot that Jesus went and prayed that prayer to God, that if by any means you can take away this cup from me, please do, but thy will be done. And so there again, you see the mural that's there as well. Like I said, this is within the Church of All Nations. Just some more. This is a picture of what the upper room may have looked like. Again, this is not the upper room, but what it may have looked like when they had the Last Supper and locked themselves in. And there's a whole lot of cool architectural stories and stuff that I could tell about that, but I don't have much time. That's built directly over top of King David's tomb, where they believe King David was built or buried. This is the second most holy site to the Jewish people in all of Jerusalem is King David's tomb. As you go in there, they believe under here is where King David is buried, and there are people, Jewish rabbis who study and pray there 24/7 there at King David's tomb. This is such a holy spot that everyone had to go and wear the little yarmulkes, and so they had free ones there that you could wear. Interestingly enough, only men were allowed to go see King David's tomb. Also, in this area is we went to go see what they believe was the house of Caiaphas, the chief priest, who was, pretty much the one who was leading the assault on trying to get Jesus killed. And so this was believed to be the home of Caiaphas. And underneath the house of Caiaphas was a crypt where they would have kept prisoners that they had. So it wasn't like they had a jail per se. There was a pit dug underneath the high priest's house. And you'll notice here in a second that there's a hole. I have a picture of a hole that's cut into the rock. And the way that they would get people in and out of the pit was to tie ropes around their upper body, lower them into the pit, and then they would send the rope back up, and then when they needed to come out, they would lower it down, the person would tie themselves up, and then they would lift them out. So it wasn't like, there were jail cells with doors or anything. So there's the hole where they would have lowered people down into the pit. gotten down into there, you'll notice it's hard to see here, but there's 2 holes in the rock right here. And then there are some straps hanging down. Those straps would not have been there, but those holes were there. And so what they would do is they would run ropes through there, and they would tie people's arms up like that when they were getting ready to whip them. And so, that would be an example of a place where they may have done the whipping and the flagellation of Jesus. That was a pretty interesting thing. They've now dug so that you can get down into the pit through a walkway, but while we were down there, it was pretty neat. It was kind of dark down there, and we read Psalm 88, which is someone crying out to the Lord, and to read that in a pit where your only light source is, coming up from above, pretty powerful. And then we went back and we were supposed to go to bed that night, but some of us decided to go to the Old City at night. They said, we don't suggest going to the Old City at night. And to some pastors, that sounds like, dude, you have to go to the Old City at night. So it was predominantly the pastors that snuck away. Luckily, my wife's not here. Because she was like, be safe in everything you do. I was like, yeah. But we went to the Old City at night because we knew we wouldn't have that experience, and it was really cool. I mean, to walk up and down. I mean, this is the width of the roads going through the Old City. Here's a car, right? That's basically the width of that. It's two-way traffic, right? So there are times where someone starts to come down, and then there's a battle of who's going to be the one who backs up. There's yelling and fighting and honking, and someone's got to try to back all the way up. And so not a lot of cars. I mean, there are scooters and things like that, but there are some cars. There are little mini garbage trucks that go through and are always collecting stuff. But then you also have all of the foot traffic is also using these same things in and amongst the city. So it's really tight through there. But here are from the outside of the city walls of Jerusalem. At night, all lit up, and so you can just kind of see how grand it is. The current walls that are there now are only about 400 years old. The original city walls, obviously thousands of years old, but those are layers deep. But they've tried to continue to keep some semblance of what it would have looked like. This is when we started the next morning, the Via Dolorosa, where we were going through kind of the stations of the cross as we went. It's amazing because all throughout the day, you have these groups that are going and doing it. And some of them, stop and have prayer at each one. There was one that was a Latin American group who was singing the entire time they went from place to place with a guitar. And so it was really cool to see the different ways that people went through there. This is the sanctuary of the Flagellation. And so, again, this is built on the place where they believe that Jesus could have been tortured. You'll notice up in there, that's the crown of thorns and a mosaic up on the top of the church right there. Part of that also is the chapel of condemnation. And so that is where they believe that Pilate came and actually pronounced, that Jesus would be handed over to the Jewish people and they could do with him as they please. So that they believe this is where that decision was made. Again, Pilate didn't live here. Pilate just came down here to conduct business on behalf of the Roman government and then was going back to his main place. Every time you get to one of these stations of the cross here, there are little markers and then typically little places that you can go in and have services. But again, here's just some cool pictures of, as you're going through the old city, all of the shops, are essentially just two wide double doors that open up, and then their shop is right there. Sometimes you can't even walk into the shop. Like on this one, you just stand outside of the shop and point, I want that, and that, and they hand it to you. Many times their home is actually on the back side of the shop, and so they just live right behind that shop. Notice there's no posted hours. They just open and close whenever they feel like it. You just kind of got to know when places are going to be open. Then we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the place where they believe that Jesus was crucified and buried. So this right here is the entrance to where they believe the tomb was or is. This is, they believe, this rock is directly above the place where they believe the tomb is. The tomb has only been opened twice, I think, in all of history. And so, you don't get anywhere near it. This is like layers above. But a very holy place. Again, multiple churches all use this space. And so, like, depending on what church you're part of, there are certain times and days that you can go there. We lucked out. There were people on our trip who had gone before who said the line to get in just to see this little room. Because, like, where I'm standing, I'm like, well, if one of two people on the right-hand side here in this little tiny room where this rock is, hours and hours of a wait just to step into there. For us, partly because it was coming off of COVID and tourism was down and hadn't fully rebounded yet, we got in 15 minutes. And part of it was too, again, Johnny, our guide, got us there technically before it opened and somehow got us inside. As we were leaving, there were lots of crowds. Here, this is hard to see, but here is a crucifix, Jesus on the cross. This is right above another little altar. And if you crawl underneath that altar, there's a little hole right there, and there's not actually glass there. They believe that directly below there is where the cross of Jesus stood. And so there is an interesting, the reason it's open is you can smell, and there's a sweet smell that comes from there. It's strange. No one knows why, but that's there. This is all inside that church. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is massive. It's like a city block type of thing, but like multiple layers and deep and everything else. This is the stone where they would have, they believe that when Jesus was taken down off the cross and they anointed his body, this is where it happened, on this rock. There's been a gentleman who every day of his life comes and pours oil and praise over that rock, the rock of the anointing. Then inside the city of, Old City of Jerusalem is Lutheran Church of the Redeemer. So actual Lutheran church in the middle of the Old City. A newer church compared to all the others. Very minimalistic. You'll see here, here's the altar. There's the pipe organ on the back side of that. Their altar is 2 candles across and the book. Here's their Paschal candle from 2021. So very, very simplistic church. The cool thing about where this church is, though, for a long time they didn't know where exactly the exterior walls of the church of the old city of Jerusalem were, and so they didn't know if the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was inside or outside of Jerusalem city. And so when they were digging the foundations and things for this church, they found the old walls to the city. So in the basement are the old walls to the city, which means that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was outside of the city in the time of Jesus, which means when they took him out of the city to be crucified, that would have been outside of the city. Then we went to the Western Wall. This is known also as the Wailing Wall. You have to wash up before you get anywhere near it. This is the most holy place to the Jewish people. So this wall right here is the retaining wall between the Jewish part of the town and the Muslim part of town. And the Muslim part of town, just beyond this wall, is where the second temple would have been for Judaism. And so they believe that God fulfills their promise eventually when they can get back onto that land and rebuild the temple. And so they come out and pray every day, all the time here, and cry at this wall, praying that one day they'll be able to cross over and rebuild their temple. Again, all you'll see here is men. There is a large section of the wall where men can go and pray, and then there's like a 4-foot section that women can go and pray. Yeah, it's just the way it is. You'll notice it's hard to see on some of these people, but they have, again, you can go, depending on how devout you are in Judaism, you might have the little box that you had fixed to your head and put the scrolls in, and you may have the little boxes that tie to your wrists and arms. And if you're not, you can rent them. So you can rent them and put them all on and be ready to go and pray. But as they pray, they write down their prayers and they stuff them in the cracks of the wall. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. This is the garden tomb. This is a secondary location where some people believe that Jesus' body may have been laid. They believe this may have been the property of Joseph of Arimathea, where Jesus' body was laid. It's highly contested. Where they believe at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that is probably the spot that is most agreed upon of all of the sites that happened there. But there are some people who think that Jesus was buried here, and here's why. It's a garden, lots of beautiful flowers and stuff. But a long time ago when they found this, you can kind of see it here, the 2 eyes, and there's like a nose. Some people believe that this was Golgotha, the place of the skull. Quite literally because, it looked like a skull. And people named things because, this is, Shepherd's Rock, because a shepherd lived there, right? So they believe that this could have been Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. It's near this property here, which has a vineyard and wine vats. A place where they would actually press the grapes to make wine. Joseph of Arimathea was rich. You would only have wine presses if you were rich. And then there is a little spot here where there is a tomb. This is, again, representational. This is not a real stone that they found like that. But as you stepped in to the little tomb in the side, there was a little antechamber here. I think I've actually shown this in one of my sermons. A little antechamber here, and then here is 3 spots where you could have laid bodies in a tomb. And so this was found at that location, where there was a wine press and near this Golgotha-looking thing. And so some people believe that this may have been the place where Jesus was buried. While we were there, we had Holy Communion, which is a pretty powerful moment there. On our last day there, the first 2 days, the first day was a travel day to get there, last day travel day to get home. Again, we had a COVID test. So we went to August Victoria Hospital. This is a hospital that is actually funded by Lutheran World Federation. So the ELCA is a part of that. And so part of the money that is donated to the church, a portion of that goes on to the Synod, a portion of that goes on to the ELCA, and then the ELCA supports things around the world. And so part of that is this hospital. It's the only hospital in the area that will actually treat Palestinian people. Really, really great hospital, and they do really great work there. So if you want to look them up, you can, but it's run by the Lutherans. And then the last couple of pictures here are some free time we had. We went up and down, back into the old city, through the markets. Here is a spice shop and just a mountain of spice. And so, it's art, but it's also like, a really cool way to display. And so all these little tiny shops, there's Pastor Lowell. He was my internship supervisor. When I was walking through the city alone one time, I found this little music shop, and he was looking for a drum. And I was like, dude, you got to come back. Follow me. And so we went back, and we spent a while there. He bought a drum. Some other people found us. They bought, ouds, which are these big guitar things. And all of a sudden, other shopkeepers started coming out, and we had, this jam session for a while. It was really cool. Because, in all honesty, sometimes you'd walk up to a booth, and there would be nobody there. And what happens is people have lived there for generations, and so they own multiple shops. And so they might be standing over here working this shop, which deals in fine jewelry, and then they own the music shop a couple of stalls down, and so they'll wander over, and help you out. And again, here's some of these streets with these shop doors. Like this is the only music store in all of Jerusalem, essentially. Like everything was packed into there. All kinds of fresh food and flowers and all kinds of amazing stuff that, is interesting because there's like no refrigeration. It's just like stuff's just sitting out there. You hope it's fresh. None of us ever got sick or anything. But here's just a picture of kind of what that area looked like in the time of Jesus and before. So you had things like Galilee up here, Samaria, Judea, and then, right here is the Sea of Galilee. Jordan River flows down, and here is the Dead Sea. And so that kind of gives you an idea of some of these things I've talked about. Here's Jaffa, or Joppa. This would have been Caesarea. Caesarea is up here. Jaffa was Haifa. So that was down here. Here's Caesarea. Here's Capernaum up here. Here's Jerusalem and Bethlehem down here. So Jesus was born down here, lived up here in Capernaum for most of his life, and his big trek was back down to Jerusalem at the end of his life. And then here's kind of what that area looks like today. So this is the state of Israel. This is the state of Palestine. In Israel, they will not refer to it as the state of Palestine. They call it the West Bank, and that's it. They don't acknowledge that they're Palestinian. They don't acknowledge that they're their own state. Nothing. So they're here. Here's the Gaza Strip where a lot of fighting happens. Tel Aviv, and some of those places that we talked about. This is all desert land down here in Negev. Why was this area fought over so much all throughout history? Because this is all desert. And so this area up here, between these bodies of water, and near this body of water is where all the greenery is in the Middle East. Not all the greenery, but you know what I mean. Like in that time period, like that was how you had life, water and food. And so that's why this was fought over historically for so long. Here's Johnny, the guy I kept talking about. Guy was an absolute hoot, man. We absolutely loved him. He called himself Johnny the Gangster, Johnny the Greek. None of those. He wasn't Greek. He wasn't a gangster. He always had stories for everything. But his family have been guides for travel companies for generations. And so he has grown up doing this. And so like I said, everywhere we went, people knew Johnny. So it was really cool. He also told us a lot of cool pieces of lore, I'll put it, because, who knows how much of it is true. He told us the stuff about like the 14 points of the star in Bethlehem. He told us about, in John 21, Jesus reappears to the disciples when they're out fishing and they can't catch anything. And he says, recast your nets out. And they pull in so many fish that, their boat's overflowing. He says the lore is that it was 153 fish that they caught that day. And he said the reason for that lore is because there were 153 nations in the world at that time, and that Jesus wanted to send the disciples to every one of those nations and feed them. And so, again, lore, nowhere in the Bible does it say they caught 153 fish. But he had a lot of cool stories about that, of stories that have been passed down through generations. Stories like the 30 pieces of silver that Judas has paid would have been the cost of a slave during that time. So it was almost as if Judas was enslaving himself type of thing, for that amount of money. Other cool things, there was, I don't have a picture of it, but some of those games that were etched into the ground at the synagogue, there were other ones throughout the city that were carved by soldiers. And they played a game called Game of Kings, and it was played on execution day. And essentially they would cast lots with some of the people that were scheduled to be executed. And if one of them won, then they would get to be king for a day. Essentially, they could do whatever they want for one day, and then the next day they would be executed still. But they got to dress up and they dressed them up with a crown and with purple robes and all this stuff. And so, here's a game where they're casting lots for things to dress someone up like the king. It was a known game that was played, and yet here are all of these things that happened to Jesus and in Jesus' story that match up with all of this stuff. We brought back some swag, some stuff. I put it out on the tables out there. I just do this as a representation. You could buy a little bit of everything. I bought my kids T-shirts that said one was a Batman T-shirt and said Batman in Hebrew for Max because he was into Batman. So you could get Hebrew anything over there. But there's some stuff out there as you leave tonight. If you want to take a look at some of that stuff, I'll be out there and I'll be happy to tell you about some of the things that I brought back. I do want to say that if we have enough interest, we are hoping to take some people to Israel from Resurrection in 2024. What that would mean is that sometime in 2023, we would need a financial commitment to see if we have enough people who are wanting to go. Ideally, a minimum of 6 or 7, and then it could go up from there if we want. I do know that 5 people have already expressed interest, and so we're really close to that. So if you are interested, if any of this has seemed like, hey, this is kind of interesting, might want to take this trip, I will tell you that there are people that went on that trip who have pretty severe mobility issues and still were able to do 90% of it or more. And they're aware of that, and they'll try to get you to places if you need some additional assistance. It's not cheap, that you wouldn't think it would be. It's essentially airfare, all your hotels, 90% of your meals other than some lunches, and all the gratuity is included. Everything, it's an all-inclusive thing. I think when we went, it was about $4,700 per person. But again, all-inclusive, and that is 10 days in and around of actual touring, and then 2 additional travel days. So if you are interested, please, even if you're like, I don't know, I'm kind of interested, let me know. I'll put your name down, and then as it gets closer and we know more details, we'll begin to pass that out to people. I know Lord of Life, who went before, they did a night like this, and they had a bunch of people go, oh yeah, we're going back next time. And some people even went the first time, were like, yeah, we're going back again. So I believe we'll probably partner with them, and then maybe another congregation or 2 to help with cost and everything like that. So yeah, that's everything. So yeah. Went a little long, but that's okay. Feel free on your way out if you want to grab some food to go, a plate to go. Check out some of that swag. If you have questions or things you want to talk about, let me know. And again, I'll send this little presentation, a link to it out so you can view it anytime in a little more detail at home.